Philadelphia is filled with historic sites, but which ones should you include in your visit? Let's find out. Today we're exploring some of the city's most iconic attractions.
We're just going to go on in, have a look, see what there is here in the Independence Visitor Center. There is a cafe back here. This is really about a block long. And then parking is over this way, and out this door will be the National Constitutional Museum. And then here's the menu over here. They have coffee, they have cheese pizza, they have breakfast sandwiches, and those are all-day options. They have cookies, hot dogs, drinks, everything. I guess is reasonably priced considering that you're in a tourist area. But just wanted to give you a view of what else there is in here, and I do think it's worth the stop because you do have nice clean bathrooms in here, and this is really a very nice open airy space. They also have photo ops here, so you can be one of the signers of the Declaration. Currently we are at the Visitor Center. The National Constitution Center is down the hall there. Down the block there. We're going to Independence Hall. We've heard a lot about the Ben Franklin Museum. We'd like to do that. And we will more than likely do the American Revolution Museum as well. And then over here, we're going to see the exhibit of the Ben Franklin Courthouse. And we're told Old City Hall is also very interesting. So we'll be taking a look at some of these, and some of these you can go in, and some of these you can just view from the outside. Oh, and here's the Museum of the American Revolution. So this is an example of what it would have been like to put ink on the plate for a printing press. And one other thing I happened to notice while we are standing here, we came just to get an early preview of what's happening for the 250th right here in Philadelphia. And they are marketing this as their biggest year yet. So 52 weeks of first, you saw some of those statues around the town that we've picked up. You see they have some major events, like they have the NCAA Division Men's Basketball Tournament. They have a PGA Championship coming up. FIFA's coming here in June. They have a TED Talk. They have full-on events for the actual 4th, and you see it goes all the way through the end of the year, including the All-Star Game happening here on July 14th, and then the Rocky Fest, the film's 50th anniversary, on December 3rd. So they are truly celebrating all year long. Okay, we are exiting the way we came in at the Market Street entrance. From here, we are going to go across to the President's House. Okay, so now this is President's House, and this is supposed to be the footprint of what would have been the presidential residence. This whole area has a history on the abolition of slavery because, of course, slaves built what structure originally would have been standing here, and this tells the story on our way to Civil War. So this gives you a little sense of the archaeology of this site. So actually they've built the replica footprint above the archaeological site. Down below is the kitchen, the below ground passage. You have a rear wall of the main house as well, but that is some of the original brickwork of the house that would have stood in this spot. Also, there would have been slave quarters on this spot as well, a little further back from where we're standing. The presidential office would have been here. So, of course, the controversy about this site is that it does speak a large bit about the slavery that took place in this space. And there were panels that used to be here that the Parks Department were ordered to take down, unfortunately, that gave a little bit of a history of slavery and what the people who built this space and took care of this space, what their situations would have been like, and that unfortunately has been erased. There's the National Constitution Center over there, starting there all the way back to the American Revolutionary Museum. You can find historical monuments about the founding of this country. This is the Liberty Bell Visitor Center. There's a line here because you have to clear security before you go in. I understand that you can only see the crack if you go in from this end, but if you are willing to go around the back and not be bothered by not seeing the crack in the bell, you can see it from the other side. We are now going to head over to Independence Hall and find out where we go for our tour and clear security over there. Now, here's the thing I would say about the Independence Hall tour is that you have to get, if you want to get the tour proper, you have to get tickets in advance. They're only $1 each at the time that I'm filming this. However, it's the in advance part. Tickets for this date were released back on March 9th, about a month prior. There was a tour that included the second floor of Independence Hall that we're missing out on because I didn't know a month ago that we were coming here. So as soon as you know, as far in advance, go ahead and book your tickets for not only this, but any national park tour that you want to do. And keep the faith, because the day before they usually release additional tickets. That's how I got tickets for this particular tour. Okay, so you have to cross at the corner here of 5th Street. So we are going to go right across the street here. They make sure that we cross at the corner, and you're going to follow it around to Independence Square. Okay, so we've come around. And this is the little park or square behind Independence Hall. Here is the entrance and security area. So we're going to go through there. It looks like there's a security tent over here. When we get through the other side, we'll let you know what to expect. All right, that was super simple. We just went over to the park ranger, said that we had tickets. He checked our tickets virtually because we're traveling. I don't have a printer. And now we're at the rope waiting to go in for the tour. So we are very excited, aren't we?
Yes.
We are going to get started in the very delightfully orange room that we're in right now. Talk a little bit about the building's life, kind of first 100 years of life for a few moments. And then we will, I promise, get to where both the Declaration of Independence as well as the United States Constitution were written and signed over there in that room. And not in this one. So if you started to take the picture about how this is where it happened, this is not where it happened. It's over there. The building that you've all walked into today is the original one. It is about 75% of the original woodwork. It's about 90% of the original brickwork on the outside, and it is original to 1732. So this building is chugging its way along towards its 300th birthday. So this building is older than the United States, meaning we are not building this building to be Independence Hall. We have no desire to be independent in 1732. We were good at being British in 1732. We get rights, we get privileges, we get to do our own thing, and we get the added spectacular benefit the King and Parliament pretty much wholesale ignore us. So after 50 years of being a British colony, we figured we should have a nice place to run our government from. So we built this not to be Independence Hall, but to be the State House for Pennsylvania. And it was a public building. Folks could come on in, they could use the space, they could see what was going on, but really like what room you even ended up in the 18th century had a lot to do with where you were coming from. Anybody joining us from Pennsylvania or Delaware today? Oh my God, we got like 4 of you. Yes. So, you guys are in the right spot. If you were visiting us in the 1750s, you probably had read in a newspaper that the courts for Pennsylvania and Philadelphia were meeting, and you wanted to come out and watch who was on trial. Spain, Italy, Canada. All right, our lovely northern neighbors. Well, if you folks were coming to say hi, you probably actually would have been walking up the stairs, because you, representing your lovely nation, would have come to say hi to the British representative, that colonial governor, who was upstairs. So, all three branches chug along here. It goes relatively well, but eventually King and Parliament start to pay attention to us, don't like what we've been doing, and when we don't cooperate, they start to take away the things we liked as colonists, which included stuff like running our own courts, or making our own laws, or electing our own governor. So by 1775, we are frustrated and mad and trying to figure out what's next. So that's when we start meeting the River Crossing.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the furniture original?
Furniture is mostly old. The building has a really long life. It is a used government building until about 1900. So the stuff mostly isn't making it. But we know that, courts have tables for lawyers. So we have 18th century furnishings for lawyers. We have 18th century books. I can give you a really good idea of the space, even if we don't have the original furniture. This is the color that it would have been in the 1770s and 1780s. So as we go through the building, all of the colors that you see are correct to those decades. So when it was an active court, I recognize that it looks kind of odd. You need a prosecutor, you need a lawyer, you need a defendant. If you're on a jury, you get juries, you need justices, there is a public trial. So it looks really fancy. But all of this same stuff exists in the federal courthouse across the street. This is your defendant's stand. And this is something that's still used in the British system today. It's called a prisoner's dock. They look a little bit different than this, and you get to sit, evidently, having never been on trial in London myself. But the prisoner's docks go away in the American system, but remain in the British Commonwealth system. You all have come on into the room where both the Declaration of Independence as well as the United States Constitution are going to be written and signed. We know a ton about those events. We know the decisions, we know the discussions. We do not know where these people sat. Sorry, I know it's what you want to know. It ends up being something that's really important to us in a way that is profoundly unimportant to these guys. There are people showing up late, there are people leaving early, there are folks who have other jobs. When they show up here in 1775, we've been at war for a month. We don't care where Button Gwinnett sits. We care about what we are doing with our relationship with Great Britain. And for the vast majority of the guys in this room, in May of 1775, we want to keep being British. Being independent is a last-ditch, terrifying, scary thing. And so these guys are trying to get back to what we had. And the first year of war makes it pretty clear that that's not happening. So then we had to start trying to convince people that this jumping ship thing is a good idea. We're not getting everybody. And that's okay. We didn't need everybody. We needed in July. First to actually say we're being independent. And then we have to vote on how we're going to tell the world about what we did. And on July 4th, 1776, we vote to adopt and approve the words of how to tell that world. And on that day, the big thing we do has almost nothing to do with quill pens, ink, or signatures, and everything to do with a printing press. We want the world to find out. We want it done fast, so off to the printers it goes, and by the morning of the 5th, we have a few hundred of these. And that's how the world finds out. That beautiful handwritten, hand-signed one we gotta get it written out. We gotta get the cats together to sign it. And that signing process begins in August. The original of this hangs out down in Washington, D.C., the National Archives. The challenge of this document is that this is a wish. It takes 7 years of time and energy and thought and work to gain what we want out of this. And in 1783, we had neither king nor law. And by 1787, we are going, oh, we have to figure out what we'd like. And we are sent back into this room to figure that out. And we spent 4 months fighting. Folks show up, once again, showing up late, leaving early. Some states don't show up at all. Some decide to leave halfway through. Benjamin Franklin has to sit everybody down multiple times and tell them to sort of focus, or we're not going to come to a decision. But over the course of 4 months, we do make the decision that we want law, and we craft that Constitution. We then have the challenge that we have to use that new Constitution. And we start using it in 1789. The Constitution is 4 pages long. The guys in this room are tasked with an incredible job. But they also come with that with the knowledge that they do not know what is going on next. So much so that there is a gentleman in this room who helps write the Constitution. His name is James Madison. He's from Virginia. He's one of the major authors of the Constitution. And he is also in our first Congress. And during that first Congress, he writes to a friend, a guy named Thomas Jefferson, who was not in this room for the Constitution. And he writes to Mr. Jefferson and says that using the Constitution for the first time is like going into the wilderness to try to find a path that has no footprints. The guy who writes it is saying, I don't know what to fill in next. They write incredible open-ended statements into this document. They write big, giant to be continues. They write a ton of space into this document. The only thing in this room today that gets to actually watch those events is the chair up front. That is from 1779. But in 1787, it is sat in by a guy who you might not necessarily feel like you have a ton of affinity with George Washington, who sat in that chair during the 4 months of the Constitutional Convention, tired, hungry, and desperately wanting to go home, but also writing those 4 pages of the Constitution.
So there is a 4 o'clock tour that would take you upstairs where she said the international business would have taken place. All right, and here is another one of those ones. This one has, stepping back for the light, the colonies. Okay, so they do have a museum on the property here. They have the park store, and on the other side of Independence Hall is Congress Hall, which you would need tickets for, but it is closed at the moment for renovations. So we are going to take a little side tour here into the east wing of Independence Hall, which houses the books, the gifts, the apparel, the park information, and passport stamps. Now this is much smaller than the big gift shop across the street, and in some ways nicer. There are plenty of statues, and here is one of George Washington. And they have little plaques on the ground as well. Apparently, Abraham Lincoln stood here when he raised the flag on Independence Hall on February 22nd, 1861. Wow. And then what's this one for John F. Kennedy? He stood here when he delivered his address on the Interdependence of Nations on July 4th, 1962. So next we are going into Old City Hall, and we are going to have a quick perusal here before we move on. And the historic significance of this building is that the U.S. Supreme Court met here between 1791 and 1800. And I do believe that there is a historical setup here for us to have a look at.
Just steps from Independence Hall is Old City Hall, home to the United States Supreme Court. Standing inside the courtroom, it's easy to imagine some of the nation's earliest justices hearing cases right here. It's a small stop, but one that's well worth a few minutes of your visit.
So every building has its own gift shop. This is the one for Old City Hall. Just look at the locking mechanism here. You really have to really work on that. Okay, we've just left Old City Hall and we are now headed off to the Museum of the American Revolution, and then we might double back to Liberty Bell depending on how much time we have. We're just going to walk around Old City and spend some time. I'm just stopping because I'm wondering what this building is here. It looks really monolithic. Let me show you. All right, Paul just confirmed for me this is the second Bank of the U.S. Does not look like you can go in. And there are, of course, here in Old City, a plethora of museums. There's one across the way, the National Liberty Museum. And we are passing Carpenter's Hall right now, which I don't believe that you can go in. Okay, so the delegates from the First Continental Congress met here in 1774 to resolve the grievances with Great Britain. Escalating differences between the colonies and King George III led to the American Revolution. But over here is the Military Museum at New Hall, which appears to be closed at the moment. We have found our fourth or fifth number 1, which those have been coming at us fast and furious. I wish that we could get into Carpenter's Hall. And here we have another one. I've lost count of how many ones there are. This one is set up and designed to pay homage to the Continental Congress, which, as we've just learned, the First Continental Congress met in the building right behind us and tried to negotiate with Great Britain, which didn't go so hot, and so we ended up at war. Oh, and look, they have the divided snake on here. Join or die. This block consists of a series of row houses that are from the 18th, the 19th century. The National Park Services has restored these. I don't know that they're open for tours, but it gives you an idea of what it would have looked like. So here's a nice little public garden where they have a bell, not the Liberty Bell, but it says, "For the people of the United States, from the people of Britain, July 4th, 1976. Okay, so here to my right, we have City Tavern, and this was known as a building where the elite of Philadelphia built this tavern to drink, dine, and dance amongst their own. Business and politics were on the menu, and deals were often sealed with drinks. Delegates to the Continental Congress dined here in 1787. Members of the Constitutional Convention adjourned here after 4 arduous months of creating a new framework for the government. So it was built originally in 1773, demolished in 1854, and then rebuilt in 1975 on this spot. So our next stop is right here at the Museum of the American Revolution. The museums that we've chosen to visit on this trip have special exhibitions for the 250th. This one, of course, has a special exhibit for the 250 that we're going to go in and have a look at. And the number ones just keep coming. Here's another one. We're inside the Museum of the American Revolution this time.
One of the museum's most famous artifacts is George Washington's war tent. Photography and video weren't permitted during the presentation, so it's something you definitely have to experience in person. Fortunately, that's just one part of what makes this museum special. Beyond the tent, the Museum of the American Revolution brings the Revolutionary War to life through remarkable artifacts, immersive exhibits, and interactive experiences. During our visit, there was also a special exhibition celebrating America's 250th anniversary. So this first gallery is really telling us what life was like in colonial America before the problems with the crown. So this gives you some exhibits from that time in life when the colonists were loyal to the crown. And how ironically George Washington was a British hero. So essentially the museum takes you through the American Revolution, everything that came before that led to the hard feelings and the conflicts straight through the war itself. So we were over in the buildings that held the meetings of the First Continental Congress, and this would have been a chair that would have been most likely in that building at the time. And it would have been the speaker's chair. It's hard to see with the lights, but this is of the period. And now it takes you through the war beginning in Lexington and Concord. So now this portion of the museum is focusing on the flotilla from the British Army that came into New York Harbor. And as a New Yorker, I'm fascinated because here is the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, a representation of a sword that may have been used at that time. And then Kips Bay, that's in Manhattan.
Shrink from the service of their country, but he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman.
We must remain loyal to our friends. This is our decision.
So it's also interesting to note that Independence Hall was used as a prison hold for American troops. So this museum does an excellent job of bringing to life the history of the American Revolution. Really great interactive exhibits and theaters and touching and feeling, a lot of different things that your kids can interact with, and a lot of different movies. And all along the way, we have been playing the scavenger hunt. A little guy's been checking off the different items. The 2 horses here are part of the scavenger hunt. So in 1807, this was particularly in the state of New Jersey, specifically in the state of New Jersey, when women had been allowed to vote from 1776 until that time, the state decided to take away the right for women to vote and for people of color and immigrants. The Declarations Journey starts here. Let's take a look through this exhibit that's here specifically for the 250, so you can see it if you visit the city anytime in the year of 2026. So what they've done is things like pair Jefferson and Dr. King together. So this chair on the left was owned by Thomas Jefferson, and this bench on the right is from the Birmingham jail cell where King was imprisoned in 1963. So the exhibit starts off with how the news of independence traveled and how people tried to get the news to travel from here in the States. Now, in our time at Independence Hall, the park ranger mentioned that sheets were sent out just saying that we had declared independence. This is actually one of those sheets. Then, of course, the exhibit does talk about slavery and the big thing that they did nothing about during the Continental Congress. And pretty much, as we know, they left it up to the states. And this talks about the state constitutions and how states dealt with things, and some of the leaders of the time among the African American community, like Richard Allen, James Forten, and Lemuel Haynes,
and Absalom Jones, as for instance. And this is a petition that some of the men, Absalom Jones, and Richard Allen, pulled together petitioning Congress for the abolition of slavery. So here also within the exhibit, they have plenty of things for kids to touch and feel. And so this part of the exhibit explores the Native American journey in all of this Declaration of Independence. And this particular part of the exhibit talks about how the state of Massachusetts had a foreign treaty with some of the Native peoples in the area, sort of a declaration of peace. And then this part of the exhibit talks about the French alliance. As you may know, Benjamin Franklin spent some time in France, as did Thomas Jefferson. And this talks about how our alliance during that time worked with the French. In fact, the exhibit talks about how Benjamin Franklin became a symbol of America, and portraits of him began to pop up in France. And then this starts to talk about the age of revolution. We declared a revolution, so other folks began declaring revolutions as well. So you have the French Revolution, you have the Haitian Revolution, all on the heels of the American Revolution. And then here are some other revolutions. We talked about Haiti, we talked about France, but then you see Poland, Venezuela, Chile, Mexico, Greece, Canada, Liberia, Hungary, and the Republic of Texas. So off the heels and the example of this nation's fight for independence, other countries did the same. And in this room, we begin to talk about abolitionist movements, the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation. So we're still talking about the different independence movements around the world in this part of the exhibit and giving some artifacts from those. Then we have the Great March on Washington in August of 1963.
After spending the day exploring Philadelphia's historic district, it's easy to see why these places continue to inspire visitors from around the world. Each stop offered something a little different, but together they tell a much richer story than any one attraction could on its own. One thing we learned from this trip is that if you really want to experience Philadelphia's historic district, we'd recommend planning at least 3 nights instead of 2. With many of the museums closing around 5, we found ourselves wishing we had just a little more time. If you're visiting for America's 250th anniversary, or simply to experience the birthplace of the United States, I think spending a day exploring Philadelphia's historic district is well worth the time. If you visited Philly before, let us know what your favorite historic site is in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, no matter where your next adventures take you, we hope that you enjoy the journey. Bye now.